Hello, I think we are live. Welcome everyone to Marketplace Impact, Social Procurement in Action. We are so excited to have so many people joining us from all over the country and beyond. So grateful already. I can see so much energy. The emojis are already going. So thank you for joining us, for sharing your time, your energy, your stories. And in advance, thank you for sharing your insights of social procurement as we gather here today to learn, connect, and hopefully leave feeling that we know something new or have met someone new. For those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Liz. I'm the CEO of Bisocial Canada, and I'm pleased to be welcoming you here to our time together today. In grounding us here today, I'm going to give us an introduction to the platform that we're using. I am going to provide a bit more of an overview of what we'll be doing together in our time today, and hopefully inspiring us to think about what we'll continue to do after these 2 hours together. Before diving into any of that, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. Whilst we are meeting today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which each of us call home. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples that call these lands home. I endeavour to make this acknowledgement more than just words and invite myself and each of you to consider what it means to live on the traditional lands in your community and what efforts we can all take to repair and improve our relations with Indigenous people locally and globally. During an event focused on social procurement, it's also important to us to acknowledge the role of colonialism on our marketplace and economic practices over the past 200 plus years. Pre-contact, Indigenous peoples had a marketplace that was similar to the social value marketplace that we are striving to create together through our work today. Goods and services were traded to add value, not profit, and the needs of the community and the land were always considered. With colonization, a new market was enforced, which prioritized shareholder returns and hoarding of resources, and trade wasn't done to add value, but to create individual wealth. But social procurement is a tool to reclaim power from the invisible hand of capitalism, which is failing our communities and those most in need. And we together can work towards a decolonial marketplace. So welcome and thank you for joining us. And as I said, today we are joining virtually using the platform AirMeet. So for some of us, this might be the first time we're using the platform. So I'm going to give us a quick little run through of some of the key features. So we're going to start on the right-hand side of your screen. If you look to the very top, there's a few useful icons up there. You'll see people. So this is where you can see who is here with us today. And you can click on someone to start a direct message with them. If you go to the next icon, you'll see messages. So that's where you can see the messages that you've sent and the ones you've received from others. And if you go furthest along, you'll see your profile. So if you're having any issues with your audio or video settings, or you want to update any of your personal information, go there. Below that, still on the right-hand side, you'll see the chat. And that is the chat for the whole event today. So anything you put in there, everyone will be able to see and engage with. We'll be sharing things in the chat throughout, and we encourage you to use the chat as well. If you come back over to me, another way to engage, and some of you are already using them, which is great, are the emojis. So you can use these when all of the sessions are live. You can either click on the emojis or you can use your keyboard numbers 1 to 7. If you want to give me a round of applause, boost my confidence now, that's great, test them out. And so still staying over here on the stage, you will see a CC, a button. If you click that, that will turn on the auto captions. And then if you go furthest over left on your screen, or furthest over right, actually, I'm just seeing now, you'll see a purple button with a question mark. And that's where you can go for support. Or if you go back up to people and look for Emma Reynard from the Bisocial Canada team, she will do her best to help you out. Between these sessions, we will be going back into the main page, which you may have seen when you joined today, and that is the social lounge. So that is where you will find the tables where we will be networking and discussing in between these panel sessions. So just like in real life, if you see at a table an empty chair, That's perfect. That's for you. Click join and you can sit on that chair. You'll join that table and have discussions with folks that are also on that table. If you want to leave and move around and join a couple of tables, you just leave that table, find another empty seat and join there as well. And don't worry about missing any of the sessions today, because when the stage here goes live, you'll be automatically pulled from those tables back here, so you won't miss any of the content or discussions. So this event is falling on the year of Biosocial Canada's 10th anniversary, which is really exciting. And it's given us a great opportunity to look back at all that's been achieved in the last decade and consider, how do we start to consolidate a decade of learning and experience? How do we contribute towards the momentum we're seeing for social procurement? And how do we continue to challenge ourselves to think what needs to come next to keep this momentum going? There was clearly something in the waters 10 years ago, because this isn't just Biosocial Canada's 10th anniversary, but the 10th anniversary of a number of other amazing organizations like Certified Social Enterprise Raw Carrot, the Ontario Nonprofit Network, Toronto Community Benefit Network. So we're also here to celebrate their work today, to be thankful for their continued contribution to shifting the marketplace. And I'm excited that we'll be celebrating the Ontario Nonprofit Network as one of our Social Procurement Champion Award winners later on today as well. One person who definitely knows the importance of collaboration is Biosocial Canada's founder, David LePage. Many of you here today, I'm sure, had the chance to work with David in some capacity over the years. And for those of you that don't know, David retired earlier this year, and this is one of the first times that we are coming together since in such a large group. So I would like to take a moment to express a huge heartfelt thank you to David. David's work in this field started far over a decade ago. David has been instrumental in the development of a supportive ecosystem for social enterprises, co-founding social enterprises like Embers and Community Impact Real Estate in Vancouver, co-founding organizations for advocacy and systems change like the Social Enterprise Council of Canada, developing education tools and programs for social enterprises. And David has been a mentor, a coach, and a friend for so many people, always generously giving his time and his expertise to support shifting our marketplace to produce greater social value. Identifying the need for purchasers to recognize this and to commit to buying with impact, David started Biosocial Canada a decade ago with the vision of shifting our marketplace decisions from lowest price to best value. And we've seen a huge amount of momentum in the last decade. So I'm opening our time together today with so much gratitude for all that has been and all that will be achieved, due to the generosity, the patience, and persistence of David, as well as so many of you that are here with us today. And for those of you that this feels new to today, we welcome you. We're so glad that you're here. We hope the stories and examples that will be shared today will support you on your social procurement journey and the impacts that you will achieve in your community over the next decade. Because there will be continued challenges, complex and compounding issues faced by our communities in the next decade. And social procurement has shown and will continue to be a tangible solution that prioritizes community well-being over extraction and exploitation. Supply chains are a series of connections, and social procurement offers us the opportunities to leverage these connections to create ripple effects all the way through the chain. When governments implement social procurement policies, we see the market respond. We see them increasing their spend with Indigenous-owned businesses, local businesses, and social enterprises. So over the next decade, we will continue to advocate with so many of you for political and community leaders to adopt social procurement policies, to put them into practice, and to report publicly on those outcomes. We'll continue to share resources like we will be today with the Community Benefits in Construction Guide. And we'll continue to share stories and examples and to learn from each other. And so with that in mind, whilst there is so much more I could say about what we will hopefully do and what has been done to date, I do want to kick us off by starting to look at the federal perspective. So starting to look at what has been achieved at the federal government level, where across departments, we have seen the development of policies and programs contributing to social value goals. So I'm pleased to welcome onto the stage with me in just a moment, Associate Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada, Michael Mills, and the Director General of Public Transit with Infrastructure Canada, Mark Matz. It's so great to have you both here. Cameras working, speakers working, it sounds like. And I am excited to get into the good stuff with both of you. So I won't do bios too long, but I do just want to give a little bit of a longer introduction to you both. So we'll get started there. So as I mentioned, Michael Mills is the Associate Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada. Michael is focused on ensuring that PSPC's mandate commitments and corporate priorities are followed in the areas of greening, reconciliation, and diversity and inclusion. And Michael is also PSPC's reconciliation champion. And so in this role, he supports the department's commitment to advancing reconciliation and increasing Indigenous participation in federal procurement. Mark Matz is the Director General of Public Transit with Infrastructure Canada, and Mark leads on the implementation of public transit programming, including overseeing federal support for major transit projects, active transportation, zero-emission transit, and rural transit solutions. So a lot of expertise on the stage right now and a lot of thoughts to share, I'm sure. So I'm going to jump straight into the questions, and I'm going to come to you, Michael, first. As we've mentioned, we've seen a huge amount of shifts and growth in social procurement practices in the last decade. So I wonder if you can kick us off by sharing some of your reflections on that development and growth that you've seen of social procurement across the federal government.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth, for having me. I'm very glad to be here today. Before I kick off into that, as Elizabeth did mention, I am the champion for reconciliation. People will see that I do have this little patch of leather here because it is the Moose Hide campaign day today. So I would like to draw attention to, how we can help eradicate violence against Indigenous people of gender. So in terms of social procurement, I would say, certainly since 2022, we've had in social procurement policy. And I think the way I would pitch it is really looking at procurement as an impact activity. So we're trying to go beyond just supplying the goods and services that the government needs in order to deliver its mandate, to looking about how can we actually maximize the value. So I think we're looking at fairly globally, looking at environmental impacts, but more and more on social impacts. And on the social side, really the kind of key area of focus for us is how can we bring more diverse owners of businesses and enterprises to kind of supply the goods and services that the government needs. How can we open up our procurement activities? How can we simplify them? How can we make sure that diverse business interests are actually aware of the opportunities and they have a fair shake? So in some cases, we've talked to, different business communities that say they just aren't aware of how to do business with the government. So we have Procurement Assistance Canada, which does a lot of outreach to businesses across the country to explain and try to demystify the procurement process and kind of help people understand, how do I find opportunities, how do I participate, and how do I set myself up for success. So a big part of it is really trying to reach out to those communities. Another part of it is also thinking through procurements and about how can we actually restructure procurements so that they actually make sense for the kind of great opportunities and skills and services and products that diverse business owners can bring. So for us, that's a real focus. We certainly have more to do. We are trying to understand a lot more of the marketplace, to understand where those diverse businesses are, where the talent is, where the ideas and the energy is, and then figure out how do we leverage that. So that's a big part. So I think over the next decade, you're going to see us more and more thinking about how do we restructure our procurements to make them simpler, more accessible, and how do we make sure that we're not putting things such as requirements that you must have done 10 years of business with the government before you can participate, so that we're not closing opportunities before even people get started.
I think that's amazing, Michael. As you said, I mentioned there's the policy, and I think it's so exciting to hear you speak to, yeah, we've got the policy, but this is now what we are doing. Putting the words on the page, yes, gives us a mandate and a first step, but we're thinking about how are we doing our procurement? What do we maybe need to do differently? What relationships do we need to build? So I think it's really exciting and inspiring to start to hear some of those examples, and hopefully some of the folks joining us today thinking, oh, I didn't know that there was this opportunity for me to engage and build that relationship with the government. So that's really exciting. And as you said, I know you started to also think about what's coming next, which we have to be doing in terms of keeping the momentum going forward. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. But I'm maybe going to come to you, Mark, and ask you the same question. From Infrastructure Canada, we've got the CEB, the Community Employment Benefit Initiative program. I know there are a number of other initiatives, as you said, looking at sort of environmental and sustainability as well. So, Mark, can you share a little bit more about your reflections on the growth you've seen in social procurement and community benefits across the federal government?
Absolutely. Thank you. I think I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective, federal perspective as a funder. So as somebody who is not leading projects, we're not implementing projects or on the ground actually hiring people. What we're doing is we're supporting someone else who is the proponent, somebody else, usually a province or a municipality, in the case of public transit, that often has a major procurement or set of procurements they want to do. And the federal government's coming in as a support, really as a funder. And I think the evolution over time in that perspective for Infrastructure Canada has been almost an enlarging view of what that activity, what that support, and what that project actually is. Early on, many, many years ago, you would have seen us just thinking about a project as the physical piece of infrastructure. The goal was, well, just build the subway or the rail line or whatever it is, and that's the end of it. And over time, I think people have come to understand better that a project like that entails many opportunities for social benefits, for community benefits, for all kinds of other outcomes that you might want to seek. And you mentioned community employment benefits. I think that's a real watermark, honestly. In 2017, the federal government came out with the Investing in Canada Infrastructure program that featured community employment benefits. For those who aren't familiar, it's essentially reporting on any project over 25 million that details the employment or procurement from a specific set of groups, and it has to include at least two set of groups from a large number of underserved populations within Canada. So trying to promote some visibility and transparency around the action of community employment benefits. And that's been expanded out to a number of programs since then. I think even more recently, what's happened is you're seeing people pulling back even farther and saying, yes, community employment benefits have been fantastic. Let's improve on that. Let's build on that. But let's also consider what environmental benefits outcomes we can see through supporting these projects, even during the construction of the projects. So not just thinking of, say, modal shift from public transit, but also, are you using low carbon concrete? Just something really simple like that. And I think some of the most recent ones have been a series of projects we announced in Toronto. There were 5 large public transit projects in Ontario that were announced in 2021. And those all feature enhanced outcomes or enhanced benefits, trying to look at what community consultations are being undertaken in those projects. How are communities being involved? What opportunities are there for community benefits to be expressed by the proponent? And for us, it's always a bit of a dance. We're not trying to tell people how to run their project, but we're trying to set out a series of outcomes that if there's going to be federal investment, these are the kinds of outcomes we want to see. And then we're turning to proponents to ask them, how can you deliver on, say, this need for community consultation and community benefits to be reflected?
Wow, thank you so much happening, as you said, Mark, and thank you for expanding a little bit more on the Community Employment Benefit Initiative. As we said, it's something that a lot of folks see as a huge opportunity. I know Charlotte from our team will be speaking to some of the outcomes and examples we're seeing of that initiative in practice a little bit later today. And I think what's really resonating from what you're both saying is the leverage power that exists, the multiplier power and the ripple effect that exists here. I think, there is a different role and an opportunity we can play, whether we're the direct purchaser, whether we're asking questions of the folks that we're purchasing from or investing into. And that is a huge opportunity, particularly, as you said, at the federal government level. And it's really exciting to see that being recognized and see that being put into practice across departments. So a lot is happening and a lot has been achieved, and we are starting to see some of the outcomes from this investment into these activities. But I'm going to come back to you, Michael, first for what comes next. How do we keep challenging ourselves? What do we have to keep doing in order to further leverage government spend and investment to serve our communities in the next decade?
Yeah, great question. Again, I think it comes back to kind of identifying where there is those kind of capacity, the opportunities, the services and the goods that are out there, and then figuring out how do we actually go out and involve those players into the processes. How do we draw more people in, make them more interested in bidding our jobs? Because in some cases they are aware, but they're not actually participating. So like, how do we do more actively engaged to understand what can we do to make the opportunities more interesting and to make sure that they're open. And then ultimately, I think one of the areas we're really focused on is, that there's this kind of saying, if you measure it, it'll have meaning. For us to really understand kind of what our impact and our reach is. So what percentage of the purchases that we're doing on a given year are going to women-owned businesses or Indigenous-owned business, Black-led businesses, or LGBTQ businesses. So, and if we start to see that, listen, we're not doing business, like what can we do more to make sure that we're having more diverse participants in our processes? And then even if we are getting them more, like, are people being driven into niches? So I think as we kind of measure it, look at what we're doing, how do we have like a higher volume overall, but also make sure that there's greater representation in maybe different industries that we didn't expect. Like if we're finding that we're only engaging people in certain service industries, how do we ensure that we're engaging people in goods industry or in the construction space? So really thinking for us, it's more about both the level and also the kind of the broad base of participation. I'll say the last thing is we're always we are large by design, and I think Mark's business is also large. Like those are public transit projects are very large. So it's kind of also playing at two levels. Like there are things that we can do on the direct contracting base, but even in the direct contracting, how do we build those incentives so that, large constructors are engaging subcontractors that are maybe bringing some diversity and having greater impact. So it's a bit like Mark's doing on the funding thing is what can we put in terms of this is the value we're trying to get from our prime contractors and having them kind of find creative ways to expand the value proposition of what we're procuring.
I feel like, Mark, you're going to probably echo a lot of that as well in terms of, again, how do we sort of get those stories and examples out there and how do we further leverage the programs that we have? So I'm going to, give the final 2 minutes to you, I think, to wrap us up with what do you see coming next?
Right. Well, from what Michael said, ditto. But I'll say a bit more. I guess the thing in our universe that I mentioned this kind of evolution of looking at projects more holistically, and I think we've come to a place now where really we're looking almost really in the round at any individual project and a series of projects now around major infrastructure to start thinking about livable communities. So how can these projects support livable communities for Canadians and people in those communities, the businesses that live there, that they actually deliver benefits across the board to the folks living in that area, and then the folks coming in. And that in the federal world, I mean, it's no surprise that we've seen the federal budget mention housing, right? And that's a huge thing for us as part of this concept of livable communities. So it's thinking of, and I'll just use a quick example in my time remaining. Like often in major transit projects, right, what you're doing is you're buying up a lot of land to, say, cut a tunnel or to bore a tunnel to create stations. And then you have to kind of divest yourself of that land. And in Europe, there's been an approach to really think about those things a bit more long-term. So rather than just sort of get rid of land, to think about, wait a minute, what is the impact on businesses in that area? How can we, as we divest of lands, ensure that businesses are not disadvantaged by the construction that's gone on, that the communities are not displaced, that we're looking long-term to avoid, say, gentrification, and that transit benefits stay within that community. So that includes things like thinking about affordable housing, about housing provision, about the environmental benefits that will come from that line, the ability to reach employment. So it's really starting to think much more around the kinds of outcomes we want to put in our agreements that help create those kinds of livable communities at all levels.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for giving us not just sort of the context setting of where we're at, but I think giving us some really tangible next steps of what we can expect. And I think hopefully, given the sort of broad array of folks that we have joining us today, they can see the role that they can play in engaging with and working with you folks and other folks at the federal government over the next decade to push this further. So this was fantastic. I think you've set us up so motivated to continue these discussions as an audience now. And so we are going to go into, we've got about 8 minutes now. We're going to go back to those tables that I discussed. And it's time to introduce yourself to each other and maybe reflect on some of these questions yourself as well. What progress have you seen in social procurement in your community, and what do you think we need to advance social procurement implementation in Canada? So we'll be pulled out now, going to the tables, and about 8 minutes, and then we'll be back to launch the new Community Benefits in Construction Guide. So looking forward to seeing you all soon, and thank you so much again, Michael and Mark, for your time.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth.